COVID and how Solvency II withstood or not the COVID shock. We've had some really interesting external speakers, some particularly prominent individuals, Professor Sir David Spiegelhalter, Sir Ian Diamond from the Office of National Statistics, and a previous Chief Medical Officer, Dame Sally Davis. So I'm hoping that many of you have had an opportunity to join some of those sessions in the last fortnight, and some of you might even have participated in the hackathon. To my knowledge, it's the first ever IFoA hackathon that was held over last weekend. So that was a very exciting development for us. In any event, thank you very much for joining us today. What we're going to do in this closing session is that we're going to ask our speakers to bring different perspectives on how the IFoA and the actuarial profession responded to the COVID crisis last year as it was evolving, as it went along. And we're going to discuss what went well and, of course, what didn't go so well. In the second part of this morning's session, there will be an opportunity for panelists to answer your questions. So please do send your questions in. Probably the easiest way is to type them into the Q&A function on your Zoom screen, and we can see those questions. And I, in the second half, will try and get through as many of those as we can with the panel. So in a few minutes, I am going to introduce our distinguished set of panelists. But before we do that, we're going to start with some short video messages. So we've asked some familiar IFoA members to talk about what they think the IFoA and the profession did well in responding to the pandemic and what they think we could have done better. So without any more preamble from me, let's play the video.
Hi, my name is Matt Saker. I'm the Group Chief Actuary at Aviva and also a member of Council. So I think over the last 12 months through the COVID crisis, the most impressive thing that the IFoA has achieved has been moving everything online. So a couple of aspects for that. First of all, the exams, where we moved things online very quickly. That enabled our students to continue taking the exams and meant that their hard work wasn't wasted. But also the conferences as well, where we moved them online very quickly. And that was incredible, actually. It opened up the ability to attend the conferences to a much wider range of our members. Normally, the cost of those conferences is quite prohibitive, means that we can only send, as an employer like Aviva, only a small number of our employees to those conferences, whereas we could actually open them up to a much broader range. So far more of our employees and our members got CPD benefits from that. If I had to point to one thing that I would have liked to see more action on, it probably would have been in the wellbeing space. I'm sure a number of our members struggled for various reasons through the COVID crisis, and I think it would have been good if the profession had perhaps reached out to them and provided a bit more support to them.
Hi, I'm Nicola Shah and I enjoy a portfolio non-executive career. I sit on the boards of Riverstone, Astor, Markel and Just Group. I'm also a trustee for local charity Unitas. In 2019, I was elected to the Council of the IFoA and I'm a member of its Audit and Risk Committee. Last year, in the early days of the pandemic, I was hugely excited to be asked to lead the first COVID-19 actuaries team providing analytical support to our frontline key workers. Like many people, I wanted to do something tangible, and doing so by using my actuarial skills was a bonus. A big shout out to my voluntary team who operated completely remotely. We were deployed to the NHS to help with their planning, with things like forecasting and allocating hospital beds, medical supplies, and even doctors and nurses. Being an actuary isn't just about maths, and whilst remote working worked extremely well, there's nothing like face-to-face meetings to forge relationships. And I look forward to a day when the global pandemic is under control globally and we can incorporate our new ways of working with seeing each other again.
Hello, my name is Matthew Edwards and I wanted to outline my experience of the past year. I've been lucky to have been able to help the profession respond to the pandemic with two distinct roles. The first with the CMI, the Continuous Mortality Investigation part of the IFoA, and also the COVID-19 ARG, the Actuaries Response Group. The CMI's work on excess mortality monitoring has helped to shape people's understanding of the real mortality impact of the pandemic. It's been very well received by our subscribers and also picked up many times by mainstream media. We also produced the COVID-19 working paper, and then we made that available to non-subscribers, and that's helped to clarify many of the problems faced by people. Moving on to the ARG, the Actuaries Response Group, I think we managed to surprise ourselves with our success, really. We mobilised very quickly. We put together a great team, a team of very skilled people across a range of disciplines, and we just worked very hard to address the main issues as they arose. No doubt you've already heard that our output's been sort of seen on social media, over 8 million hits. We've been quoted by the highest levels of the UK government. And we really do think we've had a massively positive influence on people's understanding. If I were to look back and think of where we could have done better, I think perhaps the nature of our team may have led to a degree of groupthink, but it is hard to move quickly if everyone's pulling in different directions. I suppose my main disappointment is that early on we did have ambitions to be international, to be more international, and we have had a lot of South African input and collaboration, and that's clearly been a good thing, but we never quite conquered the world. But overall, I think all of us in the group can be rightly proud of a job well done. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Julie McAllister, now working for Vestigium Services and 10th Bridge Consulting, and I'm an ICAT volunteer. Over the past year, the most significant thing to have happened at the IFoA that I've been involved with is the coordination of ICAT itself and the implementation of a new way of working to enable the IFoA to respond in an agile way. In terms of what worked well, our review of scope documents allowed us to encourage work streams to limit scope and think about alternative ways of sharing output, and the light touch oversight by the coordination team allowed work streams to take responsibility for the content and quality of deliverables. And if there was something I could change, it would be working out how to get the volunteers allocated to work streams and working together more quickly, and to improve the communications to the work streams and leads.
I'm Gary McAllister, Chief Actuary at Flibri. In March last year, Mohammed Khan and I spoke with local NHS leaders to understand what practical help might be provided by actuaries to support on COVID. The need was clear. Our core skills of organising and analysing data could help those making key decisions at local levels in the face of uncertainty. We put out a call to the profession for volunteers, and we were astonished to get over 400 responses within a few days. We wanted to ensure that everyone involved was able to work with the necessary speed and agility without being professionally compromised. Thanks to the efforts of Nicola Shah, Council was able to agree a wording under which our volunteers could operate with confidence. The external need was recognised by members, and the profession was clearly supporting members to meet that need in a timely manner. Having been a member of the profession for over 20 years, this was an unusually positive experience, and one that I think that we can and must build upon. As a result, we were able to engage directly with the NHS. Work of the volunteers included helping to quickly build and automate reporting on patient numbers and key resources such as oxygen and ITU capacity, and supporting epidemiologists to build a better understanding of the drivers of uncertainty within their modelling. We weren't able to mobilise everyone, but I know that many who volunteered continue to support the wider COVID work of the profession. We thank Suee Chieh for his support and would ask him to join us in thanking everyone who volunteered. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Sarah Matheson and I'm a Fellow of the IFoA. Until recently I was Head of Research and Knowledge on the IFoA Executive, so I was one of the actuaries on the staff. As part of the IFoA Executive, I helped to contribute to the IFoA continuing to operate for its members and wider stakeholders around the world during the COVID-19 pandemic. I think something that's worked really well in the last year is that we've been able to involve a much wider range of volunteers in our activities as a result of everything being virtual. This has meant that we've been much more inclusive, particularly when it comes to some of the COVID-19 activities, and actually the content that's been produced has made it much richer and much more diverse. One of the challenges we've encountered is actually volunteers having visibility of all of the activities that are going on. And I know many volunteers expressed concerns to me that they felt they were perhaps duplicating things that were going on elsewhere within the IFoA or within our adjacent communities. Another challenge for the future is ensuring that we record and store all of that great content for posterity so that it can be used by future actuaries, thought leaders and researchers.
Hello, I'm Chris Reynolds, and I work as the Chief Pricing Actuary at PartnerRe in Switzerland. I'm involved with the IFoA in a number of ways. In particular, I'm the chair of the Health and Care Board, and I serve on the CMI's Assurances Committee. Over the past year, the most significant thing to have happened to the IFoA that I've been involved with would be the health and care work streams of ICAT. In terms of what's worked well, it was great to see a pragmatic approach adopted to our governance so that we could respond quickly. And I'm continually amazed by the willingness of volunteers to contribute and give their time freely. And if there was something that hasn't worked so well, it's probably on the technology front. We've seen over the last year how technology can really support collaboration, but I think the IFoA still has room for improvement in the collaboration tools it offers.
Hello, my name is Mohammed Khan and I'm the General Insurance Leader at PwC. The most important thing I was involved with last year was with Gary McAllister organising a volunteer workforce of over 200 actuaries to support NHS trusts, GP surgeries and the Royal Statistical Society with desperately needed modelling advice and talent. What worked really well was how volunteers quickly gave up their time to support public bodies at a time of a national emergency, which I personally thought was amazing and showed the power of what each of us can do to support the public when it's needed. Thank you to all of you who volunteered.
Well, thank you for that video. And I think that montage really sets the scene well for the discussion we're going to have this morning. It highlighted some of the incredible achievements of the past year, from supporting NHS frontline workers and GPs through to advising governments. So it also offered, I thought, some honest views on where we might have fallen short. And I was particularly struck with areas where perhaps we could have done more to support some IFoA members. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn to today's panel. So each speaker has been asked to share a few opening comments to kick the discussion off. And so I'm going to introduce each panelist in turn as they make those introductory comments. I'm going to start with Stuart McDonald. Now, some of you will be very familiar with Stuart already, not least potentially from the webinar that he did immediately before this one, which I know many of the panelists also attended. So Stuart is head of demographic assumptions and methodology for Lloyds Banking Group, where he has a multidisciplinary team that are responsible for assumptions about policyholder health and behaviour. These are used for pricing, risk management and valuation of around £170 billion worth of pension and annuity policies. But I think Stuart's here today because he played a central role in the profession's response to the pandemic, as well as his day job, co-founding the Covid-19 Actuaries Response Group, as well as helping to lead an IFoA team providing support to SAGE in the UK. He has taken actuarial insights well beyond our usual stakeholder group, with regular radio appearances and a high social media profile, where he is better known by over 12,000 followers as Actuary by Day. His statistics and insights have been publicly quoted by the UK Chief Medical Officer and the Prime Minister, and BBC Radio 4, as well as I understand from this morning, several people's aunts, Stuart, have dubbed you the favourite actuary. Stuart.
Thank you, Annette. That's a wonderful introduction. I'm going to buck the trend of the rest of the panel. Let the exception come up first. So I'm going to make sure my talk is shorter than my introduction. I've just done quite a long session reflecting on my past year. I'm delighted to join the President and the other panelists here for what I'm sure will be an excellent Q&A session. And I thought the video that we've just seen was great and thought-provoking. So I won't repeat myself. My talk will be available online to anybody that's interested in seeing it. So I will stop there.
Thank you, Stuart. I think that's only fair because you are definitely putting in the hours for us this morning. So we'll move straight on to our second panelist, Colin Dudkovich. So Colin leads Aon's Global Life Reinsurance Solutions team from their London International headquarters, or rather, as I understand, for quite a while now, from his home in Southwest London. He's got 30 years of experience working across the full life insurance value chain, where he's been a personal financial advisor, actually selling the things that actuaries invent, all the way through to creating the complex transactions that enable insurance risks to move around the world. Colin is a fellow of the Institute of Actuaries, and previously when he was chair of the Life Board, he found himself involved in helping to form ICAT, that's the IFoA Covid-19 Action Task Force, ICAT, deep in the depth of the March-April 2020 first wave. He tells me that so far he has had 15 PCR COVID tests, 5 lateral flow tests, and just the 1 vaccine, although he strenuously denies any direct link with the South African variant, despite the upbringing which his accent will reveal. Colin.
Many thanks, Annette. And in fact, I'm about to have my next lateral flow test. I'm being a good citizen and doing 2 a week as we're supposed to do. But just some reflections from my side on the year past. It was the 21st of January last year when I was in Cape Town with some friends. It was my birthday. We were sitting there having a glass of wine. And a friend of mine, or at least my cousin's husband, is a respiratory doctor in Nottingham. And I leaned over to him and said, so what do you think about the stuff in Wuhan? Now, obviously, he had some comments to make about it as being a respiratory disease, and he had some connections into China. And actually that started a relationship we had at Aon with Nottingham University Hospital, where we actually started modeling their intake, their hospital intake, their ITU intake, to predict what was going to happen going forward. And I'll mention a bit about that later. But that was the sort of the genesis of what we needed to do. But working at a global organization, we watched it and modeled it go through China into Southeast Asia, then into Europe, et cetera, et cetera. So we watched all of that going. And with my actuarial hat on and actuarial background, it was just immediately obvious that all these actuarial skills we had could just come to play to give insights into what was going to happen next. There's time series, there's modeling, there's multi-state models that could be brought to play. Previously, I've been involved in modeling of the AIDS epidemic in sub-Saharan Africa. So all these things, it was just obvious that actuaries were going to have a large amount to say on the topic, on what the data meant or what the modeling was and what the conclusions were going to be. I guess for me, early on, one of the red rags that I had waved in my face was somebody commenting that actuaries shouldn't actually be speaking up on these epidemiological topics because we weren't epidemiologists. The first problem with that is that we did, in fact, find a couple of actuaries who were epidemiologists and a couple who were doctors and a couple who had been involved in pandemics before. And in fact, my day job was writing pandemic insurance or reinsurance for large multinational insurance companies. So somebody telling me we shouldn't get involved was never going to be well accepted. The second thing that struck me, and those of you who listened to Stuart's presentation in the last hour talked about SAGE and the input into the government advisory. No one phoned the IFoA early on. SAGE has a lot of university professors on its panel. It is a lot of medical doctors, a lot of statisticians, et cetera, but nobody phoned the IFoA and said, you guys know a lot about this stuff. Perhaps you would like to supply somebody to be on SAGE. And that really troubled me. And that's definitely something we're going to have to fix in future, that we should really be a first call for a lot of people in stressed situations like this. In terms of our sister organizations, I know the Actuarial Society of South Africa, for which I have a strong affinity, having lived there for the first 3/4 of my life, they built their own model for COVID. which they used in terms of what's going to happen in the industry. Whereas at the IFoA for the UK and for other countries, we decided not to do that, which I think was probably the right decision, but it was an interesting decision that it wasn't the obvious thing to do, that we should build our own model. I also had the opportunity to talk to some of the actual professions in the US, in France, and I know we had good contact with the Indian profession as well, but I'm not sure we ever really managed to tie together those collaborations with sister organizations. So possibly something for us to work on in the future. The highlights for me, I think, three key ones. First of all, setting up ICAT. Louise Pryor and I got it going in the beginning of April last year. I remember recording some videos that went out over Easter. I'm not sure why going out on Easter Sunday was a good timing for a video. I'm not sure if that's a peak time or a low time to put our videos out. But setting up ICAT was definitely a massive highlight. 92 work streams, 588 volunteers, getting stuck into every single part of what the pandemic can do to the financial services industry. Not news, not press stuff like Stuart stuff and the ARG stuff, but what would happen to life insurers, what would happen to general insurers, what happened to investments, all the stuff behind the scenes. And I think this is the key topic for what we take forward. The second highlight was the work we started doing for SAGE, or rather for the Department of Health and Social Care. Models of long COVID, models of what happens to mortality when hospital capacity gets exceeded. Not basic topics. The data is problematic. How do you figure out what your decay functions are? All those sort of things. But definitely topics that actuaries are very readily and well equipped to develop in a rapid space of time. And to see the faces on those people when we developed a model in a week was quite a highlight of the last year. But really, the main highlight was back to my cousin's husband at Nottingham University, when we started modeling their intake capacity. And they phoned us up week after week to say, the work that you have done, the work that you actuaries are doing is just incredible. And of course, I must mention James Robinson, who's our key guy who does the actual modeling. But they were so grateful for the modeling that had done. It was so much better than what they were getting from any other source. It was adaptive, it changed at pace, it dealt with data errors. What the one curveball they threw at us at one stage was when they said, well, here's our normal intake, but actually they've started shipping us patients from London. Like, how do you adapt a model that has this random intake of people being reallocated from other places? So that was definitely the highlight, and will continue to be the highlight going forward in terms of making a real difference and genuinely saving lives with our modeling. So much for the highlights, and just to end off, where to next, and we'll get to more of this later. I think Suee Chieh, who will talk to us in a minute, is a big Churchillian fan. So I'll use a Churchill quote. In 1942, Churchill said about the war that was going at the moment, that is not the end. It's not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning. And that's probably where we are with the pandemic at the moment. The consequences are going to be far-reaching and multi-year, not just the actual infections and deaths, long COVID and the other diseases, but the economic fallout. All the money that's going to have to be repaid from the debts that's been accumulated, etc. And this is going to flow through into financial services, and it's the work that we do as actuaries on a day-to-day basis. So it's really, how do we re-energize ourselves? The burnout of our first responders who've taken up the mantle to get stuff done. How do we re-energize the IFoA, and how do we re-energize ICAT to start delivering meaningful material that helps society deal with what has happened so far and will continue to happen? With that, Annette, back over to you.
Thank you, Colin. I was really struck in what you were saying there about the relevance of actuaries, and indeed the fact that was doubted at the outset in some quarters, but also repeatedly, I think, examples of where the profession has worked at pace on the pandemic problem. So some very interesting things there. So next we're going to turn to Nicola Oliver. So Nicola is a former nurse who worked in the UK Health Service for many years, initially in intensive care for babies and children, and then in public health. She founded Medical Intelligence in 2007 and since then has supported her clients in furthering their understanding of current and future drivers in longevity and mortality risk. Nicola is an affiliate member of the IFoA and an active volunteer for us. She's the general member of the Health and Care Board, chair of the Diabetes Working Party, co-chair of the now wound up Antimicrobial Resistance Working Party, and co-chair of the Covid-19 Actuaries Response Group. Nicola is also a module lead for the IFoA Health and Care Exam Board. I think she must need a quieter pace of life because she's doing all that volunteering for us. So in 2019, she relocated to the south of France and she joins us today from her Provençal home. Nicola.
Thank you, Annette. Yeah, it does sound like I am exceptionally busy with the IFoA, but thanks so much for inviting me to be part of this panel. Thank you everyone who's dialed in to listen to this closing event. And for me, it's a huge honour to be involved. And I often actually chat to Stuart about, but I'm not an actuary. But of course, as what I'm going to talk about is what an opportunity this has been for actuaries to be involved with non-actuaries and how the industry has really embraced a multidisciplinary team type of approach, which I say I'm going to draw on a little bit now. And another honour for me is to be involved with the ARG group. It has been a really fast ride. I mean, I can remember looking back, I think in March of last year, I wrote a small article on LinkedIn, and I think this drew the attention of both Stuart and Suee Chieh. And my greatest concern, basically, obviously because of my clinical background, was the impact on ICU bed capacity and general bed capacity in the UK. I had worked a little bit in the past on pandemic modelling with one of my previous clients, and we knew that this was a key factor in trying to manage a pandemic effectively. And I think one of the reflections I made just a couple of days later, that health system capacity and efficient containment are primary factors in helping us to delay the spread and some of the possible outcomes of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. As an experienced ICU nurse, which you never really forget, it's an expertise that requires not just some excellent clinical knowledge and learning on the job, but there's a sort of third part to that, an intuition. And the ICU team, the doctors and the nurses, we would often be able to predict that a patient is going to deteriorate despite what the vitals are telling us. So I was very worried about a lot of discussion about moving nurses and doctors from other disciplines. Could they adapt quickly enough? Could they be part of that intuition that we built? And secondly, I know that ICUs run at 80% plus capacity most of the time in the UK. So where was that spare leverage going to come from? Where was that re-resourcing going to come from? And as it happened, the NHS adapted so fantastically. Very, very proud of some of my colleagues, well, all of the NHS, but of my colleagues that still work in that area. So just thinking about the ARG group, for me, which has been one of the greatest initiatives, I believe, to have come out of this pandemic. And the clue is really in the title. We were a response group, and we never really set out at the beginning to do any original research. It was going to have to go through a lengthy peer review process. And I think we evolved really over time. And one of the strengths at the beginning is that we all knew each other. Most of us knew each other really well and trusted each other. In fact, I've known Stuart, Matthew, Matt Fletcher, Dan, Stephen Kramer for more than 10 years, in some respects, even more than 15 years or so. And that's been a great advantage to welcome some new colleagues, because that's always a nice way to start thinking differently. So great thanks to people like John Roberts, Adrian Basquier, Adrian Pennington, Adele. I don't want to call everyone out, Louis as well, in case I miss any names, but I think I want to think a little bit more about an ICU nurse and how that can help us think about what we've done and how that might be used as some kind of model for the future. So when you work in intensive care, particularly if you work in intensive care for children and babies, you're looking after the whole family. And the family look to you, primarily the nurses as the caregivers and the doctors as the support team. You're the specialists, you're the miracle workers. You're doing the day-to-day job, but the team is much wider than that. So we have physiotherapists, pharmacists, occupational therapists, geneticists, ophthalmologists, neurosurgeons, the list goes on and on and on. Now, these are people that don't have an obvious profile day-to-day in intensive care unit, but without the backup and without the support of being able to call upon those people when we needed to, then our job really couldn't have, our job would have been much more challenging. Yeah, the pharmacist can come and advise us on drug interactions. We could have learned all about those ourselves, but on a day-to-day basis, we just didn't have the time. So we knew that we could just call on those skills of those people when we needed to. So the NHS has a fantastic approach to care, multidisciplinary team approach. And I think this is something that the IFoA has started to build on during this crisis. And I think that's something we really need to maintain the momentum of, because without the input of epidemiologists, clinical experts, some of the ICU links that Stuart has made, and indeed even sometimes some of the media links that we've made, this is something we need to have the networks for now. We make those links now and we move on forward. Now, of course, crises within intensive care are entirely different to the real world. And some of the crises that we're going to be faced with and are being faced with, such as climate change, which I think will probably mention in the upcoming discussion, aren't very obvious crises. So how can we prepare ourselves? How can we be prepared for what might be thrown at us next? I think we need to build on recognizing where other professions, allied professions can support us. I think we should be making those links now, and we need to be a proper multidisciplinary team, and that will make us ready for what comes next. So that's my reflections, really. I've drawn on my experience as a nurse, which I think as a model could work really well. And many thanks again to the panel for having me here today, Annette.
Well, thank you, Nicola. I think actually, in a sense, you being here on the panel reflects what you're saying about the importance of a multidisciplinary approach and bringing together different disciplines. And I think also there's nothing more powerful than your own personal experience of ICU. So that's been a particularly interesting set of reflections, I think, in terms of knowing what the problems were going to be. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Annette.
So we turn now to perhaps a rather different perspective, perhaps a little bit more of an IFoA looking inwards perspective, potentially. So Graham Stott has been chair of the IFoA's management board for the last 2 years. He's a fellow of the IFoA, and he spent most of his executive career in Asia before embarking on a varied non-executive career, ranging from a Hong Kong-listed property developer, a UK-listed private equity-backed insurance broker, and a Fidelity investment trust. As chair of our management board in 2020, it fell to Graham, in many ways, to be faced with a raft of, I'm going to use the word, unprecedented and challenging situations and decisions as the pandemic started to have an impact on the IFoA itself. Graham.
Thanks, Annette. And I'm going to share some slides because I find it easier talking that way. So 1 second. There we go. So I'd like to look first of all at how the pandemic impacted the way the IFoA provides value to members. Because like all organizations, the shock to our way of working was profound. Last March, they required immediate actions to keep the IFoA running. It forced us to take steps which in more normal circumstances would have taken years to put in place. So how was the IFoA organized pre-pandemic? We were cautious and we didn't act until there'd been thorough discussion, debate, and consensus between boards, committees, and the executive. Fast and decisive action was often very difficult. Hence, our primary driver was rigor, and less rigorous, faster solutions were seen as inherently risky. Now, this approach is designed for a stable external environment. And even pre-pandemic, there was an acceptance that at times the IFoA had been far too slow to act decisively. As an example, in the area of data science. So in March 2020, the risk profile changed overnight from a situation where acting quickly was risky to a situation where not acting quickly was a greater risk. The first three major challenges which we faced related to the April examinations, the events program, and how we could coordinate an IFoA response to the pandemic. We didn't have time to consult and debate in line with the IFoA governance manual. We set up agile teams empowered to make quick decisions. So we had students already studying to sit over 15,000 examinations in April, and we had 2 weeks to decide whether or not these examinations could be sat online. This was pretty radical and, in the old way of thinking, a very risky exercise, and that there was a small chance that things could go wrong. We didn't have the luxury of extensive systems testing. However, the risk needed to be looked at in a different light. Was it riskier to go ahead with the examinations online, or to disappoint and disrupt students who would have had to wait at least another 6 months before they had the opportunity to sit the exams they'd prepared for? The second decision was to move all upcoming face-to-face events online. We started by wanting to replicate as many of the existing booked events as possible. Again, speed was paramount. Did we have everything in place to offer a professional, seamless approach? That would have been too risky. However, when we thought of the risk of doing something quickly and improving as we went along, and we soon noted that many more members in many more countries were joining these virtual events, to now go back to holding only face-to-face events is unthinkable. The third challenge was how we could respond to COVID in the public interest. We've seen in the videos how some actuaries offered their expertise to the UK National Health Service, or like ARG, set up blogs on social media to look at particular important immediate issues. How could the IFoA help? Again, speed was paramount. The old way of working wouldn't have enabled us to come up with an effective response. And the risk became that actuaries, and the IFoA in particular, could be seen as irrelevant when we had a lot to offer in terms of skill sets. By early April, the IFoA had set up ICAT, led by Colin and Louise Pryor, who basically were given the freedom to get on with it and set their own terms of reference and just come back whenever they thought they needed to. The volunteer response was overwhelming, and together with the ARG, the work that's been done and continues to be done has really raised the overall profile of the IFoA and actuaries in general. Was everything perfect? No, but we're learning from as we go along and we're improving. So where are we today? We must not go back to the pre-pandemic mindset where speed automatically equals risk. The fantastic success of the ARG focused on response, not research. And in the future, the IFoA should be in a position to facilitate members coming together to quickly respond to external events. Speed will be key. We're all bound by the Actuaries Code. Do we really need numerous further layers of oversight? On the other hand, there will remain the need for rigor in other areas such as research and technical papers which are published. So we now understand that one size doesn't fit all. And we're working on hardwiring this new, faster, less bureaucratic decision-making process into the IFoA. We've set up 2 trial digital communities in banking and data science to enable members with an interest in those areas to come together, share ideas, network, and importantly, tell the IFoA what they want us to do in those areas. Giving members more opportunities to tell us what they value and then quickly acting on that input is key to making the IFoA a truly member-centric body. So to summarize, it's vital that the IFoA learns what went well, what didn't go so well, and how we develop a culture allowing us to respond quickly, both to members' needs and to the external environment.
Thank you, Graham. I think that kind of three-part model is a really useful way to look at how the IFoA reacted last year. And I was also struck by, there's a kind of pragmatism in everything you were describing about how we went about trying to respond to things. And maybe also a little bit of trust. You were talking about, you know, Colin and Louise and ICAT. So there's an element of just kind of trusting people to do the right thing and get on with it. So thank you very much, Graham. Very interesting thoughts from your perspective. So finally, in terms of going around the panel, we turn to the IFoA's president, Suee Chieh. And Suee Chieh is going to reflect, I think, both a little bit on what we have heard so far and also his own thoughts about how 2020 unfolded. So Suee Chieh is originally from Malaysia and is a graduate of the London School of Economics. He enjoyed a successful career with Prudential for over 20 years, first in London and then in Malaysia and Singapore. More latterly, he served as CEO of NTUC Income and then the NTUC Enterprise Group as a whole. Suee Chieh also holds a master's degree in organizational psychology from Columbia University. He is a past president of the Life Insurance Association of Singapore and the Actuarial Society of Malaysia. He was elected to the IFoA's council in 2017 and to the presidential team as president-elect in 2019. It won't be lost on anybody that he's also, we believe, the first IFoA president to conduct his presidential term entirely virtually and remotely. So definitely a personal experience of the pandemic there. Suee Chieh, over to you.
Thank you very much, Annette, for that kind introduction. I have some prepared notes which I'd like to speak to, but I want to pick up a few points from what Colin and Nicola and Graham said. Colin mentioned about the fact that we are quoting Churchill, that this is only the end of the beginning, which I think is very apt because firstly, the pandemic is not coming to an end yet for the world, but the challenges faces the profession as well as mankind is actually, we still have a lot of questions to solve. Climate risk and biodiversity loss being the two other, which are in a way related to our work. And also the question which Colin said, how come SAGE did not call IFoA? And that has to do with our reputation and how people perceive us and where we can contribute. But hopefully we can begin to turn the tide. And Nicola talks about working in multidisciplinary teams. That is the heart of our strategy because most problems we are facing mankind today are multidisciplinary in nature. We have to work with multidisciplinary disciplines from other professions, but we ourselves cannot be too siloed into our technical areas. So this will be my immediate response. And of course, Graham's point about speed and rigor, about the need for us to behave what I would call reflexively in a period of crisis, change, and uncertainty is really necessary. I'm going to go to my prepared remarks. Firstly, to say how glad I am to be with this panel and to be able to reflect collectively on the year that was. I'm very proud and grateful of what the IFoA and the profession, the members, ICAT, led by Colin and Louise, Joe Jones and Jane, the RRG have done in response to COVID-19 in a year that was. If you put yourself in a position in Australia, Europe, or from the USA, IFoA and the actual profession anchored in the UK looks quite good. We can be reasonably proud of the IFoA and the profession in a way we have responded to the crisis and the pandemic in the last 15 months. As your president, I couldn't really ask for more or expect more. The year that was began for me in January 2020 and culminated in the seminars of the last fortnight. The depth, scope and range of the topics of the seminar and the quality of the speakers, both internal and external, marks the IFoA profession return to its public interest role, I believe, in a compelling way, in a manner that counts and befits the historical reputation and purpose of the British actuarial profession. The imagination, quality, responsiveness, and effectiveness of ARG, led by Stuart, Matthew, and Nicola, have been well acknowledged, praised, and documented. The more erudite work from ICAT of the IFoA equally deserve and has won praise. It was only this Wednesday, 2 days ago, this week, that Ross Clark in the Spectator magazine, which is a major magazine in the UK, said, but the figures which arguably give the best overall view of the lethality of the pandemic are those published by the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries as part of its continuous mortality investigation. This look at mortality as a whole and don't just compare it with a raw 5-year average as the ONS does, unquote. This is high praise indeed. A reflection of the methodical and diligent work of the team at CMI. Matthew and team, well done indeed. But the year that was is not just about the pandemic alone, from my point of view. There were many other highlights and positive outcomes in my presidential year. And I want to talk about them to give praise and to draw a few lessons. The formation of Actuaries for Transformational Change in March 2020 is one of them, and is consequential to events later in the year. Graham and others have talked about the extraordinary achievement of putting examinations online by Stephen Mann and Clifford and the team in April 2020. And Graham Stott, as chair of the management board, and Louis Pryor led the changes in our governance, which created the space for Project Moonshot, which is the implementation part of the skills module of VSMD, the Vision, Skills, Mindset, and Domain Strategy, for it to be launched. And I believe the unanimous approval of Council to the Climate Risk Report in September 2020 and its subsequent stronger recommendation in November to set a net zero carbon emission by 2030. The curation and production of the Thought Leadership Program and the Patrick Poon Presidential Speaker Series, which is still going on. If the presidential team, together with Graham and Stephen, were to sit down in January 2020 to plan the year, all these outcomes would seem impossible and would have exceeded our imagination. And I doubt we would have the self-confidence and courage to set this as our goals. It was because of the uncertainty and the crisis we behaved reflexively and created what I would call clumsy solutions. I think we did listen to ourselves and to each other, and did what we did, hence we are here today. One cannot really plan all we did as milestones in our traditional way. The council and the management board tapped on its own collective wisdom to approve, to allow, and eventually to encourage the examinations going online. Wahid, you could, on my slide, the next slide, to embrace many of the ATC recommendations. This is the Actuaries for Transformational Change recommendations in our feedback to government. Promote an accelerated moonshot program and the adoption of the climate risk report. Wahid, you can go on to the next slide. If COVID-19 did not happen, I very much doubt this would happen or at the pace they did. Today, I think we want to be positive in our reflections, but let us not suffer from hubris or sugarcoat some of the challenges. There were difficulties, there were tensions, there were differences of opinions, strong differences of opinions. I have to say, there were difficult moments. Looking back, they were actually beneficial and positive. And the diversity of opinions which we value were held with mutual respect. And that carried the day. So I'm going to tell my story through 10 events as I experienced them. And my emphasis will be on governance and culture. And to set a scene, Stephen Mann joined the IFoA in the first week of January, and on the 16th of January and the 22nd of January, the council, a subset of the council, management board and executive team had what I call magical meetings, because it was very positive. But that was the first time it dawned on certainly me and Graham and Louis that the things we need to pay attention to was not strategy. The thing we need to pay attention to is governance and culture. And the second point is that I started blogging in Asia on the crisis in February 2020. Initially, it was really about appealing for calm and avoidance of fear, panic, and irrationality as people across the world and in Singapore were panic buying in supermarkets and hoarding food and toilet paper. And there was an increase in racism against the Chinese in the USA, Europe, and Australia. To ensure that my comments are sensible, I anchor them on those comments made by the Singapore government, the UK government, and the World Health Organization, but they were not always consistently right as well. The third point, the response to my postings in the social media were very positive. I was invited to speak to various actuarial societies in Asia, and they were very well attended. And I spoke to about 1,000 persons in half a dozen webinars over a 2-month period on risk, uncertainty, psychology, and judgment. At the same time, I felt that the IFoA was not responding to the crisis. This is February 2020, and commenting on it. I knew that our governance and processes would get in the way in responding to the crisis quickly. And I feared that we would lose the opportunity to use the crisis to our advantage. In early March, I needed to verify my figures, my projection of 100,000 becoming 1 million infection worldwide in 3 to 4 weeks. I reached out to Joseph Lu, who is the head of longevity in legal and general, whom I knew from a previous meeting, and Nicola Oliver, whom I did not know, I just contacted her. Joseph introduced me to an epidemiologist called Chris Martin, and Nick Spencer, the chair of our sustainability board, suggested I contacted a guy by the name of Actuary by the Day on Twitter, and of course he was Stuart, and I reached out to him on the 6th of March, and 6 days later, as he narrated earlier on, we had our first Actuaries Response Group meeting. He did verify my figures using his more complex model. At the same time, Chris Reynolds was also going to form a group, but he now felt that it was not necessary. I involved Sarah Matheson to seek her advice, and she told me quite clearly that if I wanted to get this going, it's better to stay outside because it would take 3 to 4 weeks at least to agree on the terms of reference. And I was not, I knew that the ARG has to stay outside for the time being. Yeah. On the 10th of March, David Heath, the chair of the Policy and Public Affairs Board, cautioned actuaries to refrain from commenting because our comments must be evidence-based and we must develop a robust position. And that email was sent to members of ARG, sent to me via a number of routes. And I received indirect warnings, one via the CEO on one of the blogs I made, and another from a more senior person on council who is a friend, and I promised them that I'll be more mindful. I was in the original group for Actuaries Response Group as well as the Actuaries Transformational Change, and I instigated that we must include our Actuaries Code in our charter, because that will guide our actions, and that we must always be a credit to our profession. There was also a suggestion that we combine ICAT and ARG. I did not respond to the suggestion because intuitively I felt that ARG should be left doing what it does without the processes which we need for other erudite reports. The ARG was a direct inspiration to the setting up of Actuaries for Transformational Change. And we had our first meeting on Zoom in 20th of March. And we wanted to use COVID-19 as a burning platform for humanity. That is important because the issues which the ATC were interested in were issues on climate risk and sustainability, about economic models which are too based on short-term risk, as well as the need to use judgment in some of the many uncertainty and crisis issues we face. And ATC is not just a group of random actuaries. In it, there's a chair of FinStic, Ashok, supported by Nico, Neil Cantle, and Sam. The chair of the members, economics member interest group, Oliver, Betty's, and Martin Wright. The chair of the sustainability board, Nick Spencer, and past chairs, including Luis Pryor, Nick Silver, Nico, and Nico. At the same time, the management board was approving the examinations going online. They obviously lobbied the presidential team, and we were very supportive, and that was a very good decision looking back. And of course, it is not without risk. We have set up cross-practice boards before. One was the climate risk board, but ICAT was set up very quickly via the presidential team. And I think it is a successful cross-practice board experiment. And of course, later in a year, the climate risk report came back to the council. The ATC was pivotal in two things. It led to placing thought leadership, issues on sustainability, and also about influence on regulator into the foreground. And I spoke quite a lot about it in reference to in my presidential address. And the second one, which is consequential, is that a substantial part of our feedback to the financial services future regulatory framework came from a direct inspiration of a lot of work and thinking done in NTC. By June, we would have the dissolution. We were actively discussing the dissolution of the corporate boards, and there's a whole history of that, and the creation of Project Moonshot, as well as the thought leadership program. And I think that is the year as I saw it, the challenges, but as we are today, we have crossed many hurdles. And I will go into my next slide, which is about, largely about our governance, right? Whether it is okay for us to set up working groups outside the system, especially if it involves a member of the presidential team. The role of the president is an interesting one. Whether it is purely ambassadorial, or should he be on the pitch, he or her should be on the pitch, engaging with members and getting involved. And there are two schools of thought with that, but I felt certainly in the year I had very little choice. And then also about the setting up of cross-practice working groups within the IFoA. We need to look at our process, and I believe we would. We had many lessons which can draw from ARG, ICAT, Project Moonshot, as well as the curation of the thought leadership program. And a lot of it has to do with flexibility and reflexivity, adjusting, experimentation, and not looking for perfect solutions. And I think we should be doing that more in the future. So what are the lessons? Next slide, Walid. I think there need to be an attempt to hold the narrative at the center, because I think most of the solutions we have is going to be pluralistic, i.e. it's not going to be a single monolithic answer. And we must be able to hold the voice and the narrative at the center, something of a centralized democracy, light touch, loose and light touch. And leadership and culture does come into it. And I think this is something we have to learn. We have to be more reflexive, I think. In other words, adjusting our goals as we go along, instead of having very rigid milestones and KPIs. And I'm not criticizing that. It depends on context. It depends on whether the situation is uncertain, or if you're in a crisis, or you're in a typical complicated problem or a bigger problem. The wisdom of the council needs to be tapped on. And I think council had questions, but in the end, they were very supportive of the work of ARG, ADC, and the climate report. And we have to tap on our membership more skillfully. On the whole, we are making great progress. Yeah, and of course, the management board and the executive team support and engagement is critical. They are the ones who can ensure that we have continuity from one council or one presidential team to the next. But our overall narrative is not a fixed, it's a live one. It's not written in paper. And it is that narrative that will join us together from one generation to another. So this will be my reflections for now. And I think we will engage one another in a Q&A session.
Thank you very much, Suee Chieh. I thought that was actually a very interesting way to kind of bring all of the different comments together, and again, to get your personal and unique perspective on as you saw things unfolding through 2020. I was particularly struck by your quote saying the important thing is that we don't spend our time looking for perfect solutions. I feel like that's a philosophy many of us could definitely sign up to. And also the importance of what can be said and how inside the IFoA versus outside the IFoA, and that kind of balance between the different voices. So thank you very much. So as you suggested, let's move into the question and answer session. I think we've got about 25 minutes left. I'm going to remind everyone who's attending that we can take your questions. We've had a few questions come in, but if you want to send through more questions, then please do use the Q&A function to just type those questions in, and we'll try and get to those in the time we have remaining. So I hope the panelists are ready. We've got a couple of questions to kick off that are, I'm going to call them kind of quick fire questions. I think they can, we can go to each of you and just get a quick answer. So the first one is probably the obvious question to ask in this session. In each of your opinions, what one thing worked really well in how the IFoA and the profession responded, and what one thing got in the way? So what worked well, what got in the way? Stuart, can I come back round kind of where we started and maybe come to you first on that one?
Yeah, absolutely, Annette. Okay, I'll be quick. I think others have alluded to it, but for me, empowerment. Sometimes, the governance, the bureaucracy around the IFoA exists for very good reason, and it's what allows organisations like that to survive for centuries. And I work for another governance-heavy organisation and respect that. Nonetheless, when in a crisis, sometimes you need to move fast, and sometimes the best thing a leader can do for his team is provide air cover. And the president-elect, as he was then, dealt with all of that and just let us get on with it. And you know, we knew the situation we were in. We kind of knew that we were taking a risk, and we were okay with that. We were okay with risking our individual reputations. The ARG brand had existed for 20 minutes. You know, that we all, you know, wanted the IFoA to be safely at arm's length until we had some more certainty that we were right in our convictions. What's not gone so well, there's some really good points made earlier about international angles and so on, but perhaps for me it's the point that Colin touched on. You know, we got a number of individuals, you know, a small number, we perhaps haven't as individuals use the full depth of resources that we have in our organizations, and for good reason. I mean, my organization will tolerate me spending an enormous amount of time. If I drag my whole team in, they may start to have questions about everybody's day jobs. And because of that enormous personal commitment that individuals have made, the troops are flagging. And, you know, we've started to introduce ways to deal with that within the ARG. For example, Nicola, Matthew and I are rotating, and you know, Matthew's having a very well-earned break this week, and you know, we just all need a little bit of time out. So if this is to continue, we need to find ways to take care of ourselves and each other, and perhaps need some fresh energy.
Thanks, Stuart. Really clear. You've followed the brief perfectly. Colin, what worked well? What got in the way?
So I think from an ICAT point of view, what worked very well was the scope definition process we did, and you know, to carry this forward to working parties later, is to define a pretty narrow brief, not a wide open topic as we typically do. So that definition of a narrower brief that has a shorter time frame in terms of delivery. And that doesn't mean that the topic finishes when the brief finishes. The delivery might be, this is the next step in the process. But I think chunking things up into those manageable bites is something that we did very well, and then meant people could focus on things and get delivery. And you could see this sort of avalanche of new material coming through as time went by. So that's on the work well side. I think particularly looking forward to the climate change agenda that's going to consume us for quite a long time. What got in the way, and what IFoA should do better, and this is said with absolutely no due respect, absolutely no malice to the existing people, but I don't think we have enough staff actuaries. I think the staff actuaries we have are busy doing a lot of very good things, but we need more, because if you have a long sustained agenda like climate change, we're going to need specialists in there that are looking at that 100% of the time and rallying the troops as much as they can. Now, we couldn't have done that in the pandemic because we didn't know in January that we needed a pandemic actuary on the staff. But I think for some of the other critical issues, actually bolstering the staff of the profession to do that is what we're missing.
Again, lovely and clear. And I like that forward thinking. We might come on to those other crises later in the Q&A if we have time. So, Nicola, the same question for you, please.
Thanks, Annette. Well, it's I echo hugely everything Colin and Stuart have just said. And for me, what worked well was the ability to step up, and the reflexivity, the responsiveness and the agility with which we responded to the pandemic. And again, I know it's something that I'm very keen to talk about, but that recognition that first of all, that the profession had a big part to play, but they knew that they had to play that part with partners from a wider discipline. I mean, secondary to that, on a more of a practical level, and because I'm involved with the exam board, the exceptional response to getting those exams online, embracing of new technology extremely quickly, and the fast collaborative effort with people that are the sort of unsung type heroes who have worked really hard to get out, the module leads, the examiners themselves, setting up the questions, and the background IFoA support in that respect. When I think about what perhaps didn't work well, I mean, having been involved with the IFoA in terms of working parties for many years now, I completely appreciate and understand the processes that we have to go through to make sure that we were crossing the T's, etc., dotting the I's. And I felt at times, particularly when I was involved, again, like Colin said, we don't really want to make any judgments on what happened. We were all in a new experience, but trying to get some information out through one or two of the other channels I was working with for the IFoA, that the processes presented often more of a hurdle. And if often it felt like, I just can't be bothered to wait another 2 weeks for this paper to be reviewed, which was a real shame because some of the information and data we were trying to get out in different avenues was really strong and was really informed. So I feel like I'm sort of slightly repeating what my fantastic panelists have already said, but that would be my take.
Thank you, Nicola. And yeah, I think these rounds get harder the further down the running order you are. So on that note, Graham, what would you want to add on this question?
What Nicola just said. Basically, I'd say the number one thing that we got right was putting the exams online. And I think tremendous credit, as Nicola said, goes to the executive team and the examiners, the people that had an open mind to say, yes, we can do this, rather than, ooh, not sure. So I think that's the one big thing that I'd say. What didn't work so well or what got in the way? I go back to in the early days, we just weren't set up. We didn't have a structure that enabled us to do things quickly. And I was struck by a comment by Stuart and Matthew's article in this month's Actuary magazine that the actuarial profession is the actuaries who make it, not the set of governance structures. And I think if we'd have had that mindset going in, then I think would have moved much quicker. I think we're learning to come back to those clumsy solutions. We're learning that, we're getting there. We're not there yet, but if we can get most of the way there quickly, then that's a start. So I'll stop at that point.
Thank you, Graham. Suee Chieh, you get the last go on this round. What do you think?
Okay, I will start with what gets in the way and what was positive, right? And I'm going to put a context of the Churchillian phrase about this is only the end of the beginning. Yeah. So in other words, it's not over yet for a number of reasons, right? What really gets in the way is what Reddington told us. Our quintessential values for reticence, for accuracy, cautiousness, and consistency. And that gives us a whole set of rules to be exactly right. And that is a tremendous strength in many situations, but not necessarily in a world where there's a lot of change, right? So that gets in the way because we're trying to do things correctly according to what we have written down. What was an upside for the profession is that I believe Graham played a big role, and so did Stephen Mann. Yeah, they choose not doing anything is also doing something. Yeah, they choose to apply their energy in the right way to allow things to happen, and that is about judgment. We can write what we want about how we should behave, right? It's about judgment. Judgment and also some degree of imagination. And I think that belongs to leadership and culture. Because we can't write this down, but we must be able to have counsel as well. Yeah, they instinctively knew. There were initial disagreements, initially knew the climate report, it was unanimously voted at the end, yeah, but we did. But of course, you're trying to get it right, yeah. But the instincts were good. So there is wisdom, I believe, in the profession. We just got to continue the listening. And the listening is going to be very important. And respectful listening, because we are going to face more contentious issues. Here, the enemy is the virus. There's very little doubt about that. The contentious issues about regulation and climate risk is going to be of a different order. Yeah. So we've got to be very patient with one another. And then we can bring the best of the profession out. Yeah. I'm quite hopeful that we can.
Thank you. And that achieved what I hoped it would, which is a really good, broad and balanced view, just in a few minutes across the kind of response that we gave. So a second similar question that we've got. So this whole series has been called Actuarial Innovation. in the COVID-19 era. So the emphasis on innovation. So what is the most innovative initiative, and I guess this could be inside or outside the profession, that you have seen or been part of since the crisis began in 2020? So the most innovative initiative. I'm going to mix up the order just to keep everybody on their toes. So how about we come to Colin first on this one?
Tough one. I think the work that we've done with Nottingham University, definitely the best innovation I've been involved with. It's actually affected live people. You know, it's not a bunch of numbers on a screen or people taking out policies, which is the normal day. So I think that collaboration with other professions of hard work, yeah, that's the best innovation I've seen in the last 12 months.
Short and sharp. Thank you, Colin. How about Graham? You next.
I think the establishment of ARG and ICAT are the really things that if you go back 12 months earlier, you just would never have thought that we could have done those things. And you know, you start off and look and say there are two different groups looking at COVID. This is a recipe for disaster. They're going to trip over each other. The reality is, by the groups working together, knowing what each other's doing, they dovetailed really effectively. And the innovation is get out of the way and let them get on with it. And I think that's a lesson.
Thank you, Graham. Nicola.
Hi, Annette. Well, I think for me, it's obviously the ARG group and the mutual trust, respect, fast response within the group that evolved almost without planning. But if for a particular highlight from the output, I would say that the analysis that John Robert Stuart have done around vaccines has been absolutely fantastic and something that will be long remembered.
Thank you very much. And I think that's quite interesting that if we'd stopped and planned it, we might not have had the same pace and the same impact. So that's a very interesting reflection. Stuart, maybe you could follow that then, since you've been cited.
Well, yeah, it's getting harder, like you said, in fourth place. I'd certainly echo all of those comments to date, which I think cover the big themes. So, maybe I can just bring it a little bit more local and just talk about, some of the satisfying stuff, some of the way the collaboration has come together, working with people online, finding ways to collaborate effectively. One of my strongest memories is as part of the volunteer work that we were doing for the Department for Health and Social Care to inform their modelling for SAGE. And we were talking about how we were going to build this demand and capacity model and the kind of usual who's going to do what when you've just brought a team together for the first time. And, and it was who's going to hold the pen on the first draft of the model. And Steve Bale just said, why don't we just do it now in the meeting? And we just got on and, basically mocked up in Excel what we were going to do. And, there was lots of get better data for this, look at that. But in about an hour, a team of two actuaries, a doctor and an epidemiologist, basically threw together version 1.0 of what became our demand and capacity model, which Department for Health and Social Care used. And that was just an incredibly satisfying piece of innovation.
So that does follow on from Nicola's theme, a bit of an element of just do it. Don't talk about it, just get on and do it. Suee Chieh, what would you add on innovation?
I thought that the thought leadership program, and I wrote an email to some of you the other day about how the whole thing hangs together online, the COVID-19, but in addition to that, the finance conference and also finance in the public interest and the behavioral series. I thought that was really about bringing the profession's thought leadership to the foreground, right? Which is about influence and us sort of getting engaged with society, right? With the thought leaders of society. I thought that was an important consequence. The ARG and ICAT led the way in a place where we have some familiarity, longevity, morbidity, and demographics, right? But we are going to other areas, which is largely about economics, fairness, and environment, which I think as actuaries who anchor their work on sustainability, we must be prepared to venture into, right? As part of widening our mindsets and skill sets.
Thank you very much. Right, so I'm going to move to a couple of questions that are potentially a bit more specific. So one of the questions we've had in, it doesn't say who it's from, but it's actually about the UK's test and trace programme. So it's talking in the context of saying we've talked a lot about things that, you know, have gone well, if you like, in the pandemic. And it says the UK's test and trace programme is widely regarded as an expensive failure. And the question is, could the actuarial profession have provided any advice on better tracking and handling of the contagion? For example, comparing the UK test and trace with practices overseas that maybe had more local government involvement, that kind of thing. Now, I'm pleased to say that I think Stuart is happy to have a go at this to kick us off.
I can have, yeah, I can have a go. I think my answer will be incomplete. This is a logistics problem, and whilst I would hope, you know, bringing back this theme of multidisciplinary teams, I would think actuaries would have a lot to add to that. We're probably not the be all and end all, you know, leave this with us, you know, but yes, I'm not aware that actuaries were involved in that, but I think we would have had a lot to add. You know, it just even down to who are we tracing? You know, what's the source case? James Sharp did an excellent piece for the ARG on overdispersion and the way in which COVID spreads. You know, people talk about, oh, R is 3, so each person gives it to 3 people or whatever. That's not really how it works. 9 out of 10 people don't pass it on, and 1 person gives it to 10. And so if I've got COVID, you can go and try and trace all of my contacts. But actually what you should do, perhaps, and the mathematics seem to back this up, is find the person that gave it to me, because I may not be someone that's going to pass it on, but the person that gave it to me is. We know they've passed it on to at least 1 person, and you know, do your tracing from there. Where that type of step 1 back approach has been used, it's been very, very effective. But test and trace is going to be essential, you know, as we move now into a lower incidence stage. I think people think it's over and done with, because I mean, there's no point testing and tracing when the levels are as high as they were over the winter. But you know, as we start to unlock, as we get our freedoms back, it becomes you know, increasingly important. And you know, I hope we've got now a second chance to get it right this year.
Thank you, Stuart. Anybody else want to comment on test and trace? I think Stuart's actually given a pretty comprehensive answer there. Okay, let's move on to the next question then. So this is something that a couple of you have already referenced, actually, which is that in a sense, the pandemic was, can I say, easy in one respect, because it was a very obvious, immediate and matter of life and death crisis. But I do wonder how we can create that same sense of and response to a crisis, the same agility, if you like, when it's a crisis that is not so obviously a matter of life and death or immediate. And we've talked about climate change a couple of times. I know some people think that kind of the social inequalities that COVID-19 has actually kind of brought to the surface might be a similar crisis. So I just wondered if I might ask a couple of you to talk about that. So Graham, shall I come to you first on this then, just to get your views on it, and then maybe just to give him fair warning, I'll come to Colin next. So Graham.
Thanks, Annette. I think a lot of the issues that are not so immediate are really going to depend upon the concern or the interest that our membership has. So climate change, more and more, we're seeing actuaries saying, yes, it's now real. We really do need to be involved. And I think a lot of what we have to do is basically facilitate so that we can say to people, look, here's the issue. Those of you that really are interested, that want to, we can help you put something together to work together, not to interfere, but to facilitate. And I think the digital communities that we're setting up are a trial along that basis. And I can see that being something that, you know, there's no point in saying this, this issue X is a particularly big issue, but then nobody in the profession thinks it's, really is a big issue. We've got to be led a lot by the membership in this, and facilitating to allow membership to have that voice, I think, is going to be the key for us.
Thanks, Graham. Colin, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I think there's sort of three key bits to it, and Graham's done the one. The historical problem we've had is if it's a practice area, then there's lots of people involved in it, and we're experts and recognized as such. So that those are easy. It's when it's not a practice area, there's no actuaries employed in the area. We suffer from a lack of resources, which is what Graham's got to. I think the one thing is picking our battles. So deciding which of those crisis events we want to address, and then building the infrastructure to do that, which I think back to my comments earlier about staff actuaries. Climate change, we should hire a staff actuary now, to drive that, to be the center point of that. So it's having staff actuaries to complement the members who are intimately involved in it and want to get involved with it. And then I think it's linking into other organizations that have similar purpose more effectively, and other people who have the same purpose. And I think Nicola's the perfect example here, an affiliate member who is an expert in that topic and is going to be a source of expertise beyond any working actuary in the area. So it's crafting that. Once we've picked which battles we want to look at, it's crafting those bunch of people. And if you think back to the financial crisis, 2008, 2009, maybe we should have co-opted some economists in or something else like that, and other social people or public finance people, because of course austerity came after that, which had all sorts of other implications. So I think it's building that fabric, not just if it's accidentally a practice area of current actuaries who are getting paid to do that as their normal job.
Thank you very much, Colin. I think that's been a really good compliment to Graham's comments as well. And a lot of it seems to pick up that theme about not being too bound by our own rules around things, and just to kind of stay very open-minded about how we respond to things. So that's very interesting. I'm very conscious of time, so I suspect that some of our attendees are going to need to move on. I'm going to ask one last question. We'll do this like we did the early questions. So, if you're able to give me a single word, that would be great, but certainly no more than a handful of words. So the question is picking up on actually what I think has been quite a positive reflection of how we responded in 2020. What one thing can we do to ensure that we maintain and build on the increased profile and impact that actuaries have had over the past year? And I'm going to come to Graham first, please.
I think the greater cooperation with others, whether it's professions or other bodies, is vital going forward. The idea of volunteers working with the NHS, the great risk transfer, again, we're working with other bodies there. And I think climate change is going to be another issue where we really need to get our voice heard fully and to provide the value we can. Working with other groups is going to be really important.
Thank you, Graham. Nicola.
Thanks, Annette. I think strengthening lines of communication with our volunteers. That would be my input into that. So short and snappy for you.
Exactly what I asked for. Thank you, Nicola. Colin.
I think to add to that, the external communication, be that either publicity in the media, but probably more successfully is stakeholder communication, of figuring out what those messages are and getting them out to people in very fast sound bites to show this is the value that can be added.
Yes, focusing on the outside rather than internally. That's definitely something that I was conscious of in 2020. Stuart.
Collaborate. Tempted to leave it at one word, but find the communities that are out there, participate. Don't necessarily feel like we have to replicate the stuff. Find your experts on the topic, empower them, get them involved, support them. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Stuart. I am, as always, going to give the last word in the Q&A to the President. Suee Chieh.
You're very kind. Thanks very much. I want to answer the climate question because that is the same answer to this question. I want to share the word PACT, P-A-C-T, which stands for people, attention, context, and timing. ARG and maybe ICAT, we've got the right people and they pay attention to it, and the context and timing is correct. So the climate risk, as long as the leadership, there's Graham, Lewis, and Stephen, pay attention to it and have the right people, then you got to choose your timing. It's about attention. Recruiting a staff actuary is helpful, but you might not get council attention or management board attention. The question is what we pay attention to will create a change. Yeah. So and there's a limit. Our biggest budget is not money or time. Our biggest budget, the greatest constraint of budget is our attention. If you pay attention to it, and then you pay attention to the context and the timing and get the right people, we will be able to solve those problems. Yeah. And the one on climate risk and inequality is not about urgency. You got to choose the context and the timing. It is no point hitting the drum. It's actually choosing the context and timing for intervention. And I think there are quite a few openings, yeah, which we should exploit.
Thank you very much, Suee Chieh. I am going to bring this session now to a close. And what I do think is that it's actually been, in many ways, a more upbeat and uplifting session than I think maybe the idea of focusing on some of the things we could learn might have suggested. So it does seem like a very good place with those excellent thoughts about what we can build on to bring the session and indeed the Actuarial Innovation Fortnight to a close. I've been struck in the comments from the panelists about the strength of what I'm going to call the plural approach, working with others, working with other professions, collaborating. I will just get rid of that, apologies. But also I've been very struck by the opportunity for us to try and learn and build on what we all experienced over the last year as we move on into continuing to change the IFoA and hopefully continuing to address some of these bigger problems like climate change and so on. I think it's also been a reminder, and Colin reminded us of this in his comments, that it's not over yet. The pandemic isn't quite finished. And I think there will be more to do for actuaries and for their professional colleagues in addressing COVID-19 itself before we are kind of through the other side of this. So I'd like to thank all of the attendees who joined us today and maybe joined other sessions in the previous fortnight. You will be asked to give some feedback, so please do give us our feedback on this session and any of the other sessions that you attended, because it is very important to us to get your views. But for now, it only remains for me, on behalf of everyone who has attended, to thank our panelists, Stuart McDonald, Colin Dudkovich, Nicola Oliver, Graham Stott, and Suee Chieh. And to all of our attendees, wherever you are in the world, please stay safe. Thank you.